From the campus of Yale University, this is Business Talk with Jim Campbell, nationally syndicated across the country on the Biz Talk Radio Network and coming to you from our flagship stations, Yale Radio WYBC and 1490 AM WGCH Greenwich. All talk and all business, 60 minutes of radio with leading figures from the world of business along with the business of politics and sports. The greatest coach in sports history, 10 March Madness National Championships in 12 years, 7 of them in a row, 38 March Madness tournament wins in a row, 4 perfect seasons, an 88-game win streak. On the eve of the NCAA March Madness National Championship, we look at the legacy of Coach John Wooden. Tonight on Business Talk with Jim Campbell, Steve Jamison is a best-selling author on leadership. He's also America's foremost author and authority on the life and leadership of Coach John Wooden. Steve is a consultant for the UCLA Anderson School of Business's John Wooden Global Leadership Program, and he's been on our show for his book on the legendary San Francisco 49ers coach Bill Walsh. And Steve collaborated on this book with Coach Wooden himself, The Essential Wooden, A Lifetime of Lessons on Leaders and Leadership. Welcome back, Steve.
Good to talk to you, Jim, and kind of appropriate with March Madness
I would
heating up.
Say your timing is pretty good. And, you know, I still have in my office, I don't know if you remember, you sent me a picture in a frame of you and Coach Wooden, and that's in my office. And I also have the book that Bill Walsh wrote on his Bible, that long book on coaching. It's incredible, signed by Bill Walsh, so it's very nice. Now, first off, we got to start off with March Madness. Why do you think it's become such a big thing, and what do you think Coach Wooden would think of it at this stage?
I think he would love its popularity. He was not one that really embraced commercialism, and he loved the purity of the game, and you do see that. It's one of the reasons March Madness is so popular. College basketball has an energy and an authenticity to it that explains a lot of the reasons we watch teams play that we really don't have much knowledge about, but the energy there is so great. He'd love that. And I think he would love the fact that the sport, college basketball, has grown to the size that it's grown. It has the popularity and all that it has. So I think he'd be very pleased, and he wouldn't acknowledge this, but really March Madness started with his UCLA dynasty, starting with those great teams, 1964-65, Walt Hazzard among others, and then Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and many great players, of course, Bill Walton. It was that excitement where suddenly you had this superstar college team that got everybody excited. Before that, it was kind of a tournament. It was, I think the title of it was the Division I Men's Basketball College Championship, something like that. There wasn't March Madness. It was that excitement that his teams created. Suddenly everybody wanted to watch it, and it's only grown since then.
All right. Now, this, to me, is the great counterintuitive irony, which is no coach won more than John Wooden, and no coach focused less on winning. What do I mean?
He believed that the process, preparation, the performance was the end-all and be-all in a real sense. He loved sports, and in his case basketball, because he felt it was this wonderful test of your body, mind, and spirit, and how you applied yourself. The degree and quality of effort you put forth in those 3 areas was how you should score yourself. He did it for himself as a coach and teacher, and he asked his players to do the same. He didn't need to look at the scoreboard to know if he had been a success, and he taught his players to do the same. And by focusing on the process and the practice and all of that, instead of where are we in the standings, do we need to win this next game, he created almost a bubble of focus. And I think it was a big part of why his teams were so successful. They weren't always looking up at the scoreboard or over their shoulder. He was a teacher who taught them focus on what we're doing on the court and in the practice. So the score was important. You don't win 10 national championships without being aware of the score. It was very important, but it wasn't the most important to him.
What I thought was interesting, too, is a byproduct for him was, since he said only I know if I was a success because it was based on effort, he didn't feel any pressure, which, I mean, to me, if I had the burden of those victories, I would feel so much pressure in every game.
Well, I'm not sure that's exactly how I would state it. He knew what he had put forth. Mm-hmm. His effort was known only to him, and that's what he told his players. The amount you give in service to the team, in bringing forth your full talent as in body, mind, and spirit, only you know. Only you can judge yourself. Now that doesn't take pressure off. In my view, that puts pressure on. It's the ultimate test of how hard you can press yourself. So I don't think it relieved pressure. The pressure that it took off mm-hmm. was outside pressure.
Yes.
He, and maybe that's what you're getting at, but he wanted the pressure to be on the player to perform at his highest level without worrying about how it turned out in the standings or in the game. You can't remove that entirely, but what he wanted the first order of business to be was this focus on the process. Phil Jackson said he was a Zen-like coach.
And I'll tell anybody just reading this book, because so much of it is be the best version of yourself. You're going to find yourself being motivated, and it'll resonate just reading the book. Coach Wooden was a teacher, right?
That's what he thought of himself as first and foremost. Everybody else called him coach, but he called himself a teacher, and he was.
You see this, obviously, and you're associated with UCLA's business school as directly applicable to the business world. And I'm always amazed that he focused on down to, and you can talk about this, the shoes and shoelaces of players.
And socks. That's where he started.
Socks,
you don't put on your shoes before you put on your socks. And it's a story many have heard, but the first day of practice each year, he would get the players in the locker room and demonstrate how to put on your socks correctly. And he wanted to avoid blisters, and if you put on your socks with wrinkles and everything, you get blisters. This sounds preposterous. He was serious about it. Attention to details make big things happen, he felt, and of course that's true. He brought this focus on details to all parts of the game, not just socks, but ball handling, how you go for a rebound, all of it, how you think. All of that was part of his teaching, and businesses have found that the same is true in that context. As a matter of fact, Jim, good story today in Barron's, and one of the quotes was, "We live." I shouldn't say I'm quoting Barron's. They say we live in a society driven by results, and being focused on results is where we're all at. That's the scoreboard. He focused on your effort instead of results. It is incredibly hard to focus on effort instead of the score. It is achievable. He did it, and it's one of the big reasons for his great success. Businesses know that, too.
Fascinating.
And that's why Judy Olean, the dean of the business school at UCLA, saw in John Wooden's philosophy tremendous application in business, and they're sharing that with their own business students at UCLA and all across the country. It's why his book, Wooden on Leadership, and the one you're talking about, The Essential Wooden, are so popular.
You know, while we're on business for a sec, my business hero is Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
And there's an example of integrity and living with honor. Wooden practiced what he preached. We've got folks in Washington now who, don't live, honorably, or, they lie, whatever you want to say. But Wooden he's just as pure as he appeared to be.
Absolutely. I honestly think if Warren Buffett and John Wooden had ever met, they'd have loved each other because they were both authentic, down to earth. Warren Buffett just loves Coca-Cola and sees candy, and John Wooden had his favorite place. He went for soup, but they were the real deal, and they were. I think you can say they were honestly straightforward. They didn't want an unfair advantage. I know with John Wooden, he wanted a fair fight. He wanted a level playing field and a worthy opponent because he felt only then are you fully tested. Only then do you find out what you got inside. And this is the other part you kind of got to there is he behaved like a gentleman. He played by the rules. He respected his opponent. A lot of relevance today. Could use a little more of that around today.
Let me ask Steve, on our last minute here, what don't we know about the man?
That's a great question. I wish, Jim, I could answer it. He was, in his way, genius is the wrong word, but what he did, there's an element of mystery to anybody that gets to where he got. I don't know. I mean, we tried to put it in the books. He talked about it with me, and we put it in the books. He talked about it with anybody cared to ask. He didn't really know. I think there's something that's unknown about people that reach that kind of level of achievement, you know.
You listen to Business Talk with Jim Campbell over the Business Talk Radio Network, 350 stations around the country. Go to biztalkradio.com, find the station closest to you, listen over the internet at our stream, and access our podcast. We'll talk about the pyramid of success in our next segment. And we're back with expert on leadership and John Wood and Steve Jamison. He had a big, back on character for a second, his dad was a big impact, right? Talk about that.
His dad was a what?
A big impact on him.
Oh, huge. Number one impact, yes. His dad was profoundly influential on the philosophy that John Wooden took with him into life, and it was a straightforward, old-fashioned kind of approach. His 2 sets of threes: don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't make excuses, don't whine, don't complain. The 7-point creed, which started out, make each day your masterpiece. He talks about all of this in the Essential Wooden. But his dad just kind of was a down-to-earth guy who put John Wooden on the straight and narrow and taught him this idea about just do your best, make the effort, don't worry about being better than somebody else, but never cease trying to be the best you can be. And that's the essence of what John Wooden believed as a coach and as a teacher, and what he tried to teach his players. Don't worry about being better than somebody else, but never cease trying to be the best you can be. That's a hard message to teach college athletes, but they embraced it to the extent they were capable of.
I asked about what we don't know about the man. I was surprised to hear in the book that he didn't really coach much on game days. He did the pregame, he did halftime, but he let the assistant coaches sort of run the team during games. That kind of stunned me.
Yes, and his feeling was his job as a teacher was to show them what they needed to know, the players, what they needed to know to perform at their highest level against the opponent. He'd show them, I'll give you a kind of a simple example, he'd show them how to shoot a jump shot, let's say. Well, he couldn't shoot it for them, and his job was to show them what they needed to know to play the zone and all of the rest. At that point, once the game started, he liked to feel he had done his job to the extent that he could go up in the stands and watch it. That was an overstatement, but it was his way of saying, my job was basically through as a teacher. At that point, it was their turn.
Let me ask you this. The coaches today just have so much pressure on them to win, and they make millions of bucks. The final year salary at UCLA, you say in the book, was $32,500. What would he think of today's culture?
I think he felt that I know this, professors shouldn't be underpaid when it comes to the salaries of a coach. He thought that it was even happening back then. But, you know, he viewed sports as important, but, you know, I don't think he was comfortable with a coach that makes 20 times what an English professor would make. But he didn't begrudge anybody anything. If you could make it, that was fine with him.
Okay, now the heart of his system, this pyramid of success, it looks on the surface pretty complex, got a lot of tiers and layers. And tell us what does the architecture of it mean to start with?
He began teaching very early on as a coach and teacher this definition of success that he felt was crucial to performing and thinking the way that he felt was appropriate. His dad had taught him. Success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction and knowing you made the effort to be the best you could become. And having written that down and started teaching it, he felt that he needed to show his students and his athletes what it took to be a success as he defined it. And over 14 years, he came up with the characteristics of the personal qualities you needed and found this pyramid that contains 15 blocks that he put together as a good teaching tool. And it really isn't complicated. It's got a foundation with 5 very fundamental qualities: friendship, enthusiasm, friendship, loyalty, and cooperation, and then a tier on top of that. The middle tier has condition, skill, team spirit. I won't go through it. Kind of, you look at it and you need to digest it. But all of that, those qualities, he felt, were fundamental to bringing out your best in ways that served you and, equally important, your team. And it's another part of the equation when businesses look at his philosophy. They see this selflessness in service of your organization, your team, your company, as what a great company is all about. It's also what a great team is all about. So that's when UCLA, for example, is one of the schools that embraces this idea of how you are part of a great company, and as a leader, how you become a great leader.
And I noticed, too, it's really, these are critical success factors in life, if you think
Correct.
about it. Industrious, just loyalty, cooperation, initiative. And talk about what he meant by intentness.
This is good. One of the blocks, the second tier of the pyramid, intentness, which he describes essentially as being determined and persistent. And I said to him, Coach, well, why didn't you call that block persistence? And he kind of smiled, and I said, or, determination. You called it intentness. I'd never even heard of intentness before you put it in the block. And he smiled and said, Steve, I really don't know, but it's the right word, intentness. And the more I thought about it, the more I agreed with him, because it makes you stop and think, well, what does that mean? And in thinking about it, it helps put it into your head what he means. And, of course, all of those things are part of it: determination, persistence, an unrelenting attitude. He called it intentness.
How did you earn his trust?
That's a good question. I think it was, I never obviously asked him that, and I believe I had his trust. We did 8 books together. I think it was because he saw after the first book we did, which is A Lifetime of Observations. I think when he saw the book, he recognized that I was able to convey what he believed in a way that was reflective of his style and his sensibility. It was him on the page. And I think that was pleasing to him. It was a very substantive book. And so when I came back later and I had an idea for another one, there was no discussion. It took me 6 months to get him to agree to do the first book. And then after that, I think he trusted me. And we got along.
We have a couple more minutes in this segment. The apex of the pyramid is competitive greatness, and then along with faith and patience. But what did he mean by competitive greatness?
Being at your best when your best is necessary, and he would add, your best is necessary at all times. Here again, we go to the score is not part of his written instructions. His definition of success, peace of mind, etc., doesn't mention beating someone, a monthly quota. It mentions the necessity to be at your to make the effort to be at your best. Competitive greatness. Be at your best when your best is needed. That might just be a national championship game. It might just be a practice session. But that was how he defined it, and it was the apex of the pyramid of success. This is what it was all about: being at your best when your best was needed. And then if you read what he has to say, he will say sometimes your best isn't good enough. Somebody else is better.
As we finish up this segment, I was interested that Pete Carroll, who did not have success as a head coach in the NFL, ended up at USC and then Seattle, and he put in the pyramid of success right there. You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell from our flagship stations, WGCH, Greenwich, and WYBC Yale Radio. Third segment coming up. And we're back with Steve Jamison. The book is The Essential Wooden, A Lifetime of Lessons on Leaders and Leadership, written with John Wooden.
Oh, wait a minute. John Wooden is not. I didn't write it with him. He did it. I was just his.
Oh, okay.
His assistant. Let's get the order there. I was just at the feet of the master.
This pressure is healthy, stress is not. One of the things that I really impressed by Wooden is that he is able to convince himself and his team to get over the fear of failure. He said the team that makes the most mistakes usually wins. How did he get the fear of failure out of teams, particularly teams that were undefeated and felt that pressure?
I believe it was in part because he was able to keep focusing their attention on the process. What is the process? Is practice. It's the planning. It's this. How you put on your socks correctly. He never mentioned, fellas, you're the defending national champions. You've got to measure up or anything like that. It was all boom, right back to the fundamentals and the basics. And the only real failure you could suffer was the failure to make the effort to be your best. In fact, in one of the books we wrote, I pulled a quote out. This is John Wooden talking. I had mistakes, plenty, but I had no failures. You may not have won a championship each year. We may not have won every game, but we had no failures. You can't fail if you know in your heart you did the best of which you were capable, and I did my best. Well, he tried to teach that to his teams. And so the failure that you were confronting was the failure within, that you had somehow not done all you could do. He would prefer to lose with a first-rate effort than to win with a second-rate effort. That sounds not true. It's true.
Amazing to me. This also goes right across the business world. He had a special sort of skill, competency in organization, time management. Talk about that.
When he was elected by, I believe it was Sport Magazine or ESPN, as the greatest coach any sport, amateur or professional, in the 20th century, I saw him soon after that. And I said, boy, congratulations. How does it feel to be the best coach of the century? And he kind of shrugged and said, there is no such thing. And I said, come on, Coach. You had to be pretty good. I said, what were you best at? What were you the greatest at? And he said, organization might have been my strength.
Interesting.
Yeah, organization. And that meant down to the minute he knew what was happening year after year. By the way, at the end of that, he said, Steve, I don't want to be self-modest or unduly modest. He said, I don't think there is such a thing as a coach of the century, but if they're going to vote for one, I'm happy it's me.
This is kind of contrarian, and maybe goes along with your statement that he wanted to be totally fair, no advantage. He didn't believe much in scouting. He scouted his own team.
He didn't scout at all.
This is amazing to me.
Yeah, his philosophy was let them react to us. I'm not going to try and build around them. We're going to build, and this is my description of it, we're going to build a machine, let them figure out how to beat that machine. That's my description of his thing. He not only didn't scout teams, he didn't recruit for practical purposes. He occasionally made an exception, but he didn't travel out of state to recruit.
Wow. So let me ask this. Didn't scout, didn't recruit. Could he win today?
I think Bill Walton told me this about that same question. Mm-hmm. And that is good coaches, good teachers are effective in any era. And in the college game, let's call it, parents have a big part of the decision in who their son or daughter is going to be playing for. You agree with that?
Not only do I agree with that, he talks about you talk about the recruiting. He wanted to know the parents, whether they were divorced,
right,
what their jobs were, all that stuff.
So the parents, you're talking about today, the parents are looking around and they're seeing the various coaches out there, a lot of good ones. John Wooden meeting the parents of a player they're going to send their son off with. John Wooden would probably be very effective because they understood with him this was a man who looked out for their son's best interests. Academics, number one. So he might not have won 10. He might not have won any, but he certainly would have been a competitive coach. I think he would have been, as good as any out there today.
I don't think he would have cheated either. It's a big problem right now.
I can guarantee you he wouldn't cheat. That, by the way, that means you haven't won.
Yes.
He wanted to win on in a fair fight. That's why he wanted the toughest opponent possible. Early season games, he pretty often set up games that were practice games with teams that they easily beat. But going down the stretch, he wanted the best opposition to find out how good they were. It's just a old school kind of mentality that I think would be effective today. I'm not sure that Mike Krzyzewski isn't right there in that kind of a attitude.
He said that passion was unsustainable, which that also kind of struck me because you hear about the best coaches have these guys running through walls.
He said what was unsustainable?
Passion.
Passing?
Passion.
Passion. I'm sorry.
Passion.
Connection's a little bad. No, passion. He didn't trust emotionalism.
Yes.
Where you're up and you're down. Passion, as he said, is temporary. It comes and it goes. He wanted this sustained intensity, this emotion that doesn't boil over and is uncontrollable, and he was very good at maintaining that. You know the old story about Dick Enberg, who did a lot of the UCLA games. John Wooden was very stoic on the bench quite often.
Yes.
And at one point, John Wooden stood up and, waved his hand. And John, I think it was even less than that, and Dick Enberg said, John Wooden must be very excited. He just winked at the assistant coach, He was very controlled. He liked control. He didn't trust passion.
He had that program rolled up in his hand, right?
That's right. He contained what was going on inside with that program, kind of channeled the energy out.
So talent may get you to the top, takes characters to stay there. We've heard, his basic, do your best. But how do you maintain a competitive edge for 12 years, 7 in a row national champions? How do you do it every single year?
Well, I would say that he did it for all 27 years at UCLA and the 2 before that at Indiana State. This desire to seek your best and to teach others how to attain their best as players. And where that came from, it wasn't a desire to beat people. It was this desire to chase your own perfection and teach others how to do the same. How you sustain that over a lifetime, I don't know, but he did, and maybe it was because he saw such beauty in that process and the way that it played out. That's why so many of his players, I think almost all of his players, had this wonderful love and connection with him after they left the team.
I think a lot of people will not know this, but before Paulie Pavilion, he played in these really terrible, antiquated practice facilities where sometimes he was mopping the floor and stuff, right?
Oh, it was wonderful, yeah. Yes, it was the old men's gym. Third, by that I mean the not for old men, I mean the men's gym, the old, antiquated gym. Was so bad that, yes, he had to, before the games, he would mop the floor with his assistant coach, and the showers are down 3 floors. Other teams were working out around the perimeter of the team, the team practice, and he had such success there. He won a national championship in 64, 65. The crowds became unsustainable, and that's when they began thinking about Paulie Pavilion and built it in part so that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was Louis Alcindor then, would look fondly westward to UCLA.
Yeah.
That's how it played out, too.
Now, he was successful in building this one-team concept in that subs and bench warmers felt they had a role. I read even student managers felt they were important.
Absolutely. And this was his philosophy, that your goal, your role, was to achieve your own greatness in the role that you were that you had as a member of that team. All roles were important. Some could contribute more, but he felt that the superstar should get no special favors. Obviously, there are accommodations and all of that, but he wanted everybody to believe they were simply there to achieve their own greatness. As a member of the maintenance squad, the ball boy, the maintenance guys, the assistant coach, or the last guy on the bench. Nobody was somehow a second-rate citizen. And he taught that, and this is a thing that, again, corporations understand, that you can't have this upper tier of prima donnas. Everybody has to feel they're part of that team. He was a master at doing that.
We got 1 minute to go. Another thing that surprised me was the practices were brutal. They were tougher than the games. But after that, he didn't want them to be thinking about basketball like today's players in college. He wanted them to focus on academics. They didn't have to weight lift after practices and those kinds of things.
Yeah. Some of that would change today. The conditioning stuff might change. But he felt that you were, first of all, there to get an education. How's that for a radical concept? And he wanted his players to study and to be good students. I think most of them graduated. And not to be constantly obsessed with basketball 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
And it's a healthy approach. And his players did pretty good after they got out of basketball. Most of them didn't make money as professional athletes, and he knew that. He wanted them to be ready to be successful citizens, parents, members of the community.
Our final national segment coming up, the Wooden Legacy. And we're back with Steve Jamison, the foremost authority on the life and leadership of Coach John Wooden, the greatest coach in history. And I want to ask you first, what you think his legacy is, and what would he want it to be, or did he want it to be?
I think he wanted it to be that he was a teacher who taught some important lessons that you can carry on in life. And it had to do, as I said, with his dad's early teachings. Don't worry about being better than somebody else, but never cease trying to be the best you can be. This very simple 2 sets of 3. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't whine, don't make excuses. It was a very straightforward, old-fashioned kind of approach. I think he would want to be remembered as a guy who was a fair person and a person who was a good teacher and a good parent and husband. Now, I didn't say in there 10 national championships.
Yeah, I know.
You go to his condo, you saw very little evidence of that.
Nellie, his wife, used to say that he did practice what he preached, that she would not be able to tell if he'd had a good or bad day at practice when he came home. Will you talk about his relationship with her and what happened to him after she died? Did he lose his will, or what happened?
For a while, yeah. When they had a love affair, a love for each other that was movie time. I say it's like Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. That kind of unbelievable. When she passed away, he almost died. He told me and others that he lost his will to live. His parent, Jim and Nan Wooden, thought he was going to die, and then his first great-grandchild came along, and in her he saw Nell, and he was off and running again.
How did he maintain his humility?
It goes back to his dad. His dad was a good teacher. His dad said, don't ever forget you're not better than anyone else, but you're just as good as anybody. And they would talk about what that meant. And his dad taught that to all three of John Wooden's brothers. That's quite a concept. You're no better than anybody else, but you're just as good as anybody. And the way he saw his father conduct himself as a person of humility and yet pride and inner strength. And I believe John Wooden would tell us if he were talking, he says so in the books, your example is what counts most of all. You can preach and you can talk and you can have lists. That's all important. But they look at you and what are you doing as a teacher? So his pyramid of success was on the wall every year at UCLA. His teaching, however, of the pyramid of success was in his example. All those things in the pyramid, the hard work, the enthusiasm, friendship, loyalty, cooperation, self-control, condition, he exhibited it in his behavior. And that's where you really pick it up as a student or as a child or as a member of an organization. The boss, the guy at the top, the woman at the top, is the example of what we're supposed to behave like. That's what he did. I think John Wooden only got he got 2 technical fouls in his entire life, and he said one of them was a mistake. So,
wow.
So he was that's a little off the path, but he was a great example.
I remember you sent me some emails around the time of his passing. You were pretty wired in with the family when he passed, right?
I was. So were many other people. Yep.
And what sticks in your mind?
What sticks in my mind is the tremendous number of people affected by him. Yeah. He was like a parent. You got connected to him as a player, and not just as a player, but in other realms. His assistant coaches, the ball. Everybody who came in contact with him to any degree saw this remarkable individual who practiced what he preached, and what he preached was the good stuff. And I found myself in writing. And this shouldn't have been like this, but I found my first goal was to please him. I wanted him to feel I was doing my best and that the best was good. And of course, that's a great way to motivate people. I think his players probably did much the same. By
the way, Buffett's the exact same way. You ask all of his company heads he bought, they all say and they all have money because he bought them. They all say they don't want to disappoint him.
Well, that's exactly how I felt with John Wooden, and I know many of his players have told me that this person that you respect so much, and by the way, he wasn't a lovey-dovey coach. He was a taskmaster, but there was no shouting, no screaming, no temper tantrums, no vitriol. It was a different way of teaching, and you want to please that person.
And I guess one more on winning not being everything. I guess he was asked, or maybe you asked him, what would make him happiest, after he'd retired and everything, and he said, one more day of practice.
Yeah, that's where it was. That's where it was. That's where it was all. It was about practice. That's where the juice was. So he called it the falderall. All that came with winning, the interviews, the trophies, all of that stuff didn't mean very much at all to him. But by golly, practice, that was where it happened.
How do you compare him to Bill Walsh, who you're also an expert on?
I knew John Wooden much, much better.
Right.
But the way I got to know Bill Walsh was I asked him out of the blue to write an introduction for the first book I did with John Wooden. And he talked about John Wooden as being a philosopher king as a coach. And so I knew Bill. I wrote one book with Bill Walsh and 8 with John Wooden, and that's the difference in how I got to know them. But in that one book, I felt that there were great similarities. The differences are interesting. Bill Walsh would curse. He liked to gamble, have a drink. Yeah. So that's nothing wrong with that. But it's different than Bill than John Wooden. But they were both. Their process was very much the same. The book we did with Bill was called "The Score Takes Care of Itself."
Yes.
That means don't look at the score; it'll take care of itself. Yeah. Focus on the process.
How's Wooden's memory living on? You're involved in the Wooden Award, is it, or?
I whispered in Judy Olean's ear that she should get something going in the leadership department at the School of Business at UCLA. But I think his legacy is growing and growing and growing, especially as what we see in the culture maybe starts to look worse and worse. You start to look around and you think, wait a minute, is it? And you see a Warren Buffett. You see a John Wooden's legacy as a guy who won and he did it the right way. And that's why businesses embrace what he taught. There is a right way, and the right way can be successful. And it can be successful in both the way that John Wooden meant it and in the way most of us mean it, and that is what's the final score. So his legacy is, right now it's being taught by a group teaching his story to kids. Peanut Harper and her husband have a program on the West Coast here. They go into grade schools, and they teach the Pyramid of Success to youngsters, and that is really important. John Wooden felt that if you can start giving them the right information at the early age, they're not cynical yet.
And with 2 Woodenisms, promise to be so strong that nothing can disturb your peace of mind, promise to be too large for worry, too noble for anger, too strong for fear, and too happy to permit the press of trouble. And then, of course, peace of mind is the self-satisfaction from becoming the best that you're capable of becoming. I imagine him up reunited with Nellie holding a rolled-up program. Thanks to Steve Jamison for coming back on the finals tomorrow night. The book, The Essential Wooden, A Lifetime of Lessons on Leaders and Leadership. Go to stevejamison.com, Jamison website. It's been Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Thanks to Steve, thanks to Coach Wood, and thanks to our national audience for listening. See everybody next Sunday on Business Talk with Jim Campbell.